They laughed when the will was read. My so-called family smirked at the single dollar left in my name, calling me a failure too stubborn to face reality. I sat there feeling the weight of every whisper, every sideways glance, like they'd finally stripped me bare in front of the world. But the next day, the lawyer unlocked a secret my grandfather had hid in a sprawling eco-estate untouched and worth far more than money. That moment didn't just ignite a war for land. It set fire to every buried betrayal, pulled my children back into my arms, and forced me to prove that my worth was never theirs to decide. I'm about to share something close to my heart. But before I do, can you say hi in the comments? Or tell me where you're from? I love hearing how far my story can reach. It's always good to know I'm not alone in this. Thank you. And now, let me tell you everything. My name is Zephyr Kane, and if my story touches you, please subscribe to this channel. Your support means more than you know. It's not just about growing this space. It's about proving that voices like mine deserve to be heard. The air in Boulder that morning was crisp and dry, the kind of autumn day where the sun burned hot on your skin, but the wind cut sharp enough to remind you summer was gone. I stepped into the polished marble lobby of Stone and Keaton, the smell of roasted coffee mingling with lemony floor polish. My cheap flat squeaked faintly against the stone, and the laughter echoing down the hall cut off like someone had hit pause. Elliot Stone, the family lawyer, looked up from a sheaf of papers as I entered the conference room. His gaze was steady, unreadable, like a man who knew far more than he'd ever say aloud. I tugged at the frayed cuff of my coat and took the empty chair at the far end of the table. Around me, the Wren family sat in clusters, the Success's Theo at their helm, trading smug looks like this was already a done game. A few of my uncle's business associates lined the back wall, spectators waiting for the show. The reading began, Elliot's voice crisp, deliberate. Deeds to commercial properties, company shares, trust funds. Each name was met with murmurs and satisfied nods. Then my name. A pause. Elliot's hand reached for a small black velvet box. Inside lay a single silver dollar. The kind minted decades ago, the edges worn smooth except for the initials GW carved into the inner rim. I heard Theo's low chuckle before he spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. A fitting reward for a lifetime of wasting potential. My cheeks burned, but I kept my voice even. Grandfather always did have a sense of humor. I held the coin between my fingers, feeling the cool weight of it. My thumb found an imperfection. One ridge on the milled edge was misaligned, almost like a notch for a lock. I tucked that detail away. As Elliot closed the folder in front of him, he met my gaze squarely. Juniper, don't be too quick to decide what it's worth. For a split second, I caught my reflection in the glass partition tired eyes coat that had seen better days, a single mother barely keeping her head above water. But there was something else there too, a flicker of defiance. Maybe this wasn't a joke at my expense. Maybe it was something else. Shame shifted into anger, and anger into a strange, sharp curiosity. I curled my fingers around the coin, refusing to set it down. If this was a test, I'd pass it. I slipped the velvet box into my bag, noting the faint bulge under the lining, something hidden beneath the fabric. I didn't check it. Not yet. As I stood to leave, Elliot's voice followed me, low and deliberate. See me tomorrow after the custody hearing. This hasn't started yet. I walked out without another word, the coin warm in my palm, already knowing I wouldn't be sleeping that night. The Boulder courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper, the heavy scent that clung to rooms where decisions were carved into stone. The oak paneling gleamed, the microphones on each table catching every breath, every pause. Lucas sat across from me in a perfectly tailored suit, his lawyer leafing through a thick binder. My file, by comparison, was pitifully thin, a handful of documents and photos tucked neatly into a folder I'd bought at the discount store. His attorney went first, laying out the case like it was indisputable fact: high income, two-bedroom condo, private school tuition, extracurriculars, every bullet point ending with that word, stability. When it was my turn, I spoke about love, about bedtime reading, and homework at the kitchen table. I showed pictures of Sage and Ivy in the park, of us baking cookies in my tiny kitchen. But I could feel it in the judge's eyes. My balance sheet outweighed my heart. The gavel's rap was final. Primary custody awarded to Mr. Harper. Ms. Wren will have visitation 6 days a month. The air left my lungs. My hand dipped into my coat pocket, the coin's edge biting into my palm. The tiny metallic rattle as it shifted felt like a reminder, mockery, or promise. I still couldn't tell. Lucas walked over, his voice pitched low. When you get stable, we'll talk. I met his gaze. Stable by whose definition? The question hung there unanswered before he turned away. In the hallway, Elliot was waiting. He didn't ask how it went. He'd clearly already guessed. He handed me a different business card, heavier stock, my name embossed on one side, and on the back, faint letters A-I-S, over a circle sliced clean through the middle. Come with me, he said simply. The coin's a key. If I'm wrong, you can go back to your life as it is. I didn't call Lucas. I didn't look back. The elevator doors closed, and in the mirrored steel, I saw my own reflection, someone who had just lost the most important fight of her life, but who was being offered a door she hadn't known existed. Somewhere deep inside, a new calculation had begun. In my pocket, the coin seemed to hum against my fingers. We left Boulder under a hard blue sky, the highway shimmering like a ribbon of tin under the sun. Elliot drove without chatter, and I watched the city peel away into foothills. Asphalt gave to switchbacks. Houses fell behind us. Ponderosa pines gathered like a green congregation. Somewhere above treeline, a creek hammered itself to silver against rock, the sound threading the open window cool and insistent. The road narrowed to a gravel spur and ended at a steel gate set into the forest. It was spare and beautiful, the kind of practical elegance my grandfather loved. At its center sat a circular recess just wide enough for the coin in my pocket. Along the rim, almost lost to time and weather, was a shallow engraving, Wren. Elliot nodded toward it. Go on. The coin was warm from my hand. That misaligned ridge I'd felt at the law office settled perfectly into a hidden groove. A dry click sounded, the metal vibrating faintly through my fingers. The gate split down the middle and swung inward, slow and deliberate, revealing a valley like something from the drawing I'd made at 10 years old and taped above my childhood bed. Houses, small cedar-clad each with a rain chain singing from the eaves, stood in clusters on crushed gravel paths. A miniature hydro plant crouched along the creek, its turbine half hidden by blackberries. Solar arrays tilted like sunflowers over a meadow. Orchard rows climbed the slope in tidy diagonals, early apples glowing under their leaves. A wooden footbridge arched between two old pines, and in the canopy a library seemed to float, glass and wood strung between trunks, a ladder spiraling up from the path like a question mark. I didn't speak. I just breathed, letting the damp air of the valley settle into my chest. For a long time my life had felt like a hallway of locked doors. Here, everything opened. Elliot handed me a thick envelope sealed with red wax stamped in a single letter G. The seal broke with a soft tear. My grandfather's handwriting leaned across the page, precise and spare. Juniper, it began. I built this place from a sketch you once made and left on my workbench. It was naive and impossible, and exactly right. I could have given it to the loudest bidder and died richer, but money is the cheapest kind of wealth. I waited for the day you were ready to start over, not when you were strongest, but when you were honest enough to admit you were tired of surviving. If you are reading this, you are ready. The letter named the Community Evergreen Sanctuary. It named me its steward. I would receive an $18,000 monthly stipend, full health coverage, and education funds reserved for Sage and Ivy. The condition was simple and heavy at once. I had to live here, work here, and keep the place faithful to its purpose. My fingers trembled not with fear but with a feeling I hadn't let myself have in years: permission. We moved through the place in a slow tour. At the clinic door waited Maeve, hair buzzed short beneath a knit-cap, eyes that took you in without pity, but with a thoroughness that felt like safety. "Security and health," she said, shaking my hand like we were signing a pact. "We've got an evacuation protocol we can deploy in under 15 minutes. We drill it quarterly." Finn met us at the hydro plant, sleeves rolled, a pencil pushed behind one ear. He had the distracted, delighted look of a man who lives more in systems than in speeches. "Run-of-river turbine," he said, tapping the housing. "Variable pitch blades. If we need to dump water fast, we can bypass the penstock to the spillway. Battery backup 48 hours at moderate load. Come see the control board." The control room was clean and humming. A bank of monitors showed water levels, inflow rates, and a schematic of the gates. In the top corner glowed an icon, an open circle, a single line cutting through its center. It matched the faint symbol on the back of Elliot's card. A current passed through me that had nothing to do with electricity. Zara intercepted us on the path up to the tree library, a camera slung at her hip, a sun-bleached bandana knotted at her throat. "Media and outreach," she said, pointing with her chin toward the meadow where kids were painting birdhouses. "Farmers market here every Saturday. We keep receipts transparent and the story louder than the rumors. The county paper hasn't been kind about expansion plans for a certain lithium operation up the road, so we've had to be precise." We stood under the ladder to the library. Elliot watched me, reading the valley like a map of my own ribs. "This is not a prize," he said gently. "It's a charge. You don't just inherit it, you lead it." I looked out at the houses, the orchard, the silver run of water down the spillway. The word "lead" made my throat tighten. I had led exactly one thing the last few years: my children through weeks that felt like weather. Then I have to learn fast. I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, "and do it right. Today." We went back to the office inside the community center where Elliot slid a slim folder toward me. The trust paperwork was precise and beautiful in its own way, architecture in ink. I signed where he indicated, the pen heavy, the page smooth. He gave me a laminated card with a temporary admin code and glanced at the coin in my hand. "That," he said, "doesn't leave you." Finn handed me a spiral-bound manual with grease-smudged tabs. "Operations protocols. Flagged sections for flood-prone zones, 3 of them." He traced the map with a forefinger, a low spot near the garden, a bend in the creek, where debris liked to jam, and the corner where the path dipped toward the housing cluster. "We'll want sandbags staged by Friday. Weather looks irregular." Maeve passed me a stapled packet. "Evac playbook. We run it on a T-15 clock. Radios, muster points, buddy checks. People take it seriously because they've seen what water can do." Zara leaned against the door jamb, scrolling her phone. "Heads up, local chatter about new exploratory permits for the lithium folks. They've got deep pockets and a thin skin. The paper's been coy about who's pushing it, but the language smells like lobbyists." I heard my grandfather's voice in the cadence of Elliot's next sentence. "Before he died," Elliot said quietly, "your grandfather refused to sell a strip of boundary land. The offer that came was generous. The man who came to deliver it wore a nice watch and a polite smile." He paused. "It was your cousin." I pictured Theo at the conference table, the arch of his brows, the condescension that wasn't casual at all, but practiced. The insult in that room had been the public face of something older and colder, a plan that now had an obstacle with a human name. I asked for a meeting that evening with the 3 of them, Maeve, Finn, Zara. We sat around a battered work table that smelled faintly of sap and coffee. 72-hour risk map, I said. Every choke point, every vulnerable node. And a second document what I'll need to show a judge that my kids will be safer here than anywhere else. Schedules, childcare rotations, education support health services. If stability is a word they recognize, we're going to define it for them. Elliot's mouth ticked, not quite a smile. Spoken like a wren. Sometime after 9, Finn walked me back to the control room so I could see the night cycle. We stood in a wash of blue monitor light. A small chime sounded bright and brief, the system's weekly diagnostic. Good, Finn said, eyes on the display. Everything checks. We're solid, unless someone meddles. He said it casually, but it landed with the weight of a warning. I looked down at the coin shining in my palm, felt the tiny ridge bite into my skin, and knew a door had opened for me. Somewhere I could feel another one open for whoever wanted to come through and take what they thought they were owed. I closed my hand around the coin and told myself the same thing I'd told myself after the courthouse. If this is a test, I'll pass it. Only this time, I wasn't alone. Mist lay low over the valley the next morning, the creek, a white braid through gray. Finn and I were at the control board early, checking gate positions and flow rates, the hum of the turbine, a steady bass note under everything. Maeve's voice crackled over the radio from the guard station near the entrance. Visitor. SUV dark. 2 passengers with him. Plates are new. By the time I walked down to the main path, the vehicle had stopped near the picnic tables by the market square. Theo stepped out first, wearing a tailored jacket that looked ridiculous against the crushed gravel and the smell of compost. 2 men in suits shadowed him, scanning the campus with a kind of antiseptic interest, like they were appraising a house that would soon be gutted. Cousin, he said, smiling like this was a family reunion. Quite a place you've got here. It's not mine, I said. It's ours. He raised his eyebrows as if to grant me the point, then pulled a folder from his messenger bag and laid it on the table, giving the wood an affectionate pat. Let's talk numbers. 6 million. All cash. Clean transfer. My clients take on the liability, the upkeep, the headache. You get a fresh start. The word liabilities tasted foul in my mouth. Who are your clients? A consortium, he said lightly, as if the details would only bore me. Let's not get stuck in names. Peak Pulse, I said. I didn't ask it, I placed it. He regarded me for a beat, then tipped his head in a show of candor. They see opportunity. Under this dirt is a battery for a nation, hundreds of millions, maybe more. Boulder loves to talk about the future. This is how you build it. I let the folder sit unopened between us. Somewhere above us, a child laughed and an orchard ladder creaked. We're not for sale. Everyone is for sale, he said, a softness entering his tone that made it worse than if he'd raised his voice. You, of all people, should know what money can solve. Your situation is precarious. Courts like stability. Lucas understands that. He understands what it takes to provide it. He said Lucas's name like a lever, and I felt the anger rise up my spine like heat. I leaned forward until I could smell his cologne. Evergreen is not a loophole you can buy your way through. Theo slid a metal business card across the tabletop with 2 fingers. The front bore a sleek logo. On the back, a circle with a single cut through the middle, the same design that watched over our control board like a quiet eye. You've got a curious system here, he said mildly. Those gate valves. Elegant engineering. Shame if the weather turned. He stood. Take the week. Talk to whomever you need to. The offer is generous. After that, I can't guarantee the terms will be so friendly. He gestured, and the men moved with him as if pulled on a cord, the SUV moving away before the dust had time to rise. I picked up the metal card. It was heavier than it looked, brushed to a satin sheen. The back of my neck prickled. Finn appeared at my elbow. He give you an actual contract, a draft, I said, opening the folder. The pages were clean, professional, precise. A confidentiality clause near the back jumped out. The buyer would be entitled to conceal geologic surveys from third-party interference. My mouth went dry. We walked straight to the solar field, something sour and electric in my stomach. Finn crouched under the panel mount, scanning with a small flashlight. "There," he said, voice flattening. Tucked beneath a crossbeam was a thumbnail-sized camera, the kind you'd miss unless you were looking for exactly that. He unscrewed it gently, turned it in his palm. Data logger. Not just video. Thermal spikes vibration. Whoever planted this wanted operational profiles. How long, I asked. He thumbed the micro SD slot, then checked the mount where dust and pollen had patterned around the casing. "Installed last week," he said. "Before you came." I radioed Maeve. "Tighten the perimeter. Check every access point. Pull last week's visitor logs. Anyone who didn't belong, I want names." She answered with a short affirmative and cut the line. With Maeve, brevity meant urgency. Back in the community center, I called a meeting. We pushed 2 tables together and spread the contract, the business card, the camera, and Finn's manual out like a caseboard. "We're going to assume our systems are compromised," I said. "We isolate the control boards from any remote triggers. Change physical locks. Rotate codes. Audit the turbine and the spillway gates today." Finn was already typing a list, populating on the screen. "Firmware hardening, local-only overrides. I'll pull the gateway entirely until we certify every component. Manual actuation for the bypass until then." "Media," I said, turning to Zara. "You monitor everything. Keywords, hashtags, message boards. I want to know what they're seeding before it blooms. And if anything hits about safety or accidents here, we counter with facts and footage. No grandstanding, just receipts." Zara's face sharpened the way it did when someone handed her a target. "I'll set alerts for the company and the executives, and for Lucas's circles too." She didn't need me to explain that last part. We were past the point of pretending the lines weren't connected. The room went quiet, each of us ticking through our tasks. Through the window, the mist had lifted. Sunlight struck the panels and turned them to flat lakes. The calm felt precarious, a skin on water that could tear with a single stone. I walked with Finn back to the control room to authorize the new lockout protocols. As we stepped inside, a small amber light began to pulse on the central monitor. The words scrolled in block capitals: "Abnormal flow check now." Finn's hands flew over the keys. "Sensors are showing increased inflow without the corresponding upstream data," he said. "That's not the weather." He looked at me, face gone, very still. "This isn't us." The sky turned an ominous shade of slate by mid-afternoon, the kind of heavy gray that made the mountains fade into a flat wall in the distance. Rain came in sheets, driven sideways by gusts that rattled the pine boughs above Evergreen. Within minutes, water levels at Clear Creek began rising, the current twisting in unnatural swirls. Finn burst into the control room, rainwater dripping from his hair. "Secondary spillways locked," he said. "The system isn't responding." The monitor in front of us flashed a red, pressure warning levels climbing at a speed the forecast didn't account for. Maeve's voice crackled over the radio from the other end of the property. A family in House 14 was already trapped by water pooling around their porch. I grabbed the coin from my jacket pocket, sprinting with Finn toward the mechanical housing at the base of the dam. The rain stung my face cold enough to make my skin feel raw. Inside the cabinet, I found the problem: a small, unfamiliar device wedged into the locking mechanism of the spillway. It looked eerily similar to the hidden camera Finn had found beneath the solar array. I tore it free, the metal edges scraping my knuckles, and the lock indicator shifted from red to yellow. The slow rumble of the gates opening came seconds later. Maeve was already organizing a rescue crew with the inflatable boats stored near the tool shed. Sage insisted on coming, and though my instinct was to keep him safe inside, there was no time for an argument. He was quick and strong, and we needed hands. The current was fierce. Finn and I fought against it, the boat's bow jerking sideways more than once as the water surged past fallen branches and debris. The family, 2 parents and a boy not much older than Sage, were pale and wide-eyed when we reached them. The father clung to the railing, reluctant to step away from the shaking porch until I locked eyes with him and said, "You can't wait. Not another second." By the time we got them to dry ground, Zara had her drone overhead tracking movement near the dam's perimeter. On the feed, a group in matching orange rain ponchos hustled toward a white truck with no plates. One figure turned briefly toward the camera, and my stomach tightened at the familiarity of his gait. Later, in the small meeting room above the community center, Finn placed the dismantled device on the table. Inside, etched faintly into the circuit board, was the same ring symbol from the Peak Pulse business card. Zara played the drone footage, zooming until the blur of the truck's departing taillights came into view. When the rescue finally wound down, we gathered the evacuated residents in the hall, wrapping them in blankets and passing around hot tea. I told them the truth: this was no accident. Someone wanted to test our defenses to make Evergreen look unstable. And I promised, voice steady despite the weight in my chest, that no one would take this place from us. Before leaving, Maeve slipped me a damp envelope found in the pocket of a man swept downriver before he was pulled out by search crews. On the front was a Peak Pulse stamp. Inside, a map with a section of the dam's base circled in red. This, I realized, was just the beginning. The morning after the storm was unnervingly bright, the air scrubbed clean and sharp. I drove into Boulder with the wet map folded in my bag, Sage and Ivy staying behind with Maeve. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters, their cameras swiveling toward me the second I stepped out of my truck. Lucas emerged from a black sedan moments later, Theo at his side, both in tailored suits, and practiced smiles. The first blow landed before we even entered the building. Local news had already released an article claiming Evergreen was unsafe, showing cropped photos of submerged houses. The piece quoted an unnamed family member of Juniper speaking about my reckless leadership. I didn't need to guess whose words they were. Inside the courtroom, Lucas's lawyer brandished the article as if it were gospel. He argued that my home environment posed a danger to the children. I countered with photos of Sage and Ivy planting fruit trees with other residents, video of the rescue operation, and Maeve's sworn statement that the flooding was caused by sabotage. Then came the second blow. A document slid across the table by their side. It was a purchase agreement for Evergreen land, complete with my forged signature, and the Peak Pulse logo embossed in the corner. My pulse pounded in my ears. They were laying groundwork to paint me as someone willing to sell the land at the first sign of trouble. During the recess, I told Zara to release the drone footage of the sabotage online. Within an hour, the video had spread across multiple platforms, the comment sections exploding with demands for an investigation into Peak Pulse. My phone buzzed with an unlisted number. The message read, "The biggest evidence isn't online. Find it where GW hid it in the dark." The circle symbol appeared at the end, open at one edge, exactly like the edge of my grandfather's coin. The judge ordered the hearing paused until the authenticity of the footage could be verified. As I left the courthouse, the weight of the custody battle still pressed hard against my ribs, but another urgency had taken hold. I needed to find the place my grandfather had meant for me to discover the one hidden in the dark. And I needed to do it before Peak Pulse figured out I was looking. The night air carried a damp chill as mist drifted up from the creek. Moonlight barely reached the high branches where the library treehouse sat, its wooden frame creaking softly in the breeze. Finn and Maeve followed close behind, their flashlights cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. I held the coin in my palm, its familiar weight grounding me. The treehouse door resisted at first, but the old brass lock yielded to the key Maeve kept on a leather strap. Inside, the scent of cedar and dust filled the air. My gaze drifted to the north wall, where a carved crossbeam held the faint etching of an open ring, exactly like the one from my childhood sketch of the perfect city. I'd drawn that map over a decade ago, not realizing I'd been copying a symbol already present in my world. I pressed the coin into the groove at the center of the carving. A muted click answered. One of the wooden panels loosened, revealing a narrow compartment behind it. Inside, a wooden latch pointed downward toward the floor. Finn knelt, tracing the edge of the plank until it gave way to a small trapdoor. A cold draft rose from below. The space beneath was barely taller than a crawl space lined with shelves, sagging under the weight of old leather binders and metal lockboxes. The first binder I opened was thick with documents environmental violation reports against Peak Pulse spanning 15 years. Photographs of chemical runoff, internal memos about paying off inspectors, even repair orders for intentional damage to dam structures. In a locked tin case, we found a small matte black USB drive. Unlike any I'd seen before, it had a recessed slot on one side that matched the coin's diameter perfectly. Maeve's flashlight caught the edge of a stiff envelope wedged between two binders. Inside was a supplementary will, Gideon's handwriting in firm strokes, stating that if Evergreen's land was sold against community consent, I held the sole authority to void any contract. Back in the office above the creek, I set the coin into the USB's slot. A faint green light blinked before the file directory appeared on the laptop screen. The recordings inside were blunt, the voices unmistakable. Theo discussing with a local official how to force instability in Evergreen's systems. Lucas's voice cutting in, agreeing to help in exchange for Theo's backing of a personal tech venture. I copied every file, encrypting backups for Elliot. The plan was simple: hit Peak Pulse in the courts before they could adjust but release the evidence slowly enough to keep public attention locked on them. Alone later, the coin felt heavier than before, but not from burden, from purpose. The battle ahead wasn't just about saving a place. It was about dismantling the alliance between two men who had tried to break me in every way that mattered. The courthouse in Boulder was already packed when I arrived, reporters clustered near the entrance in the crisp morning air. Inside, two cases were about to converge: custody of Sage and Ivy, and a civil suit against Peak Pulse for environmental sabotage. Lucas sat at the defense table beside Theo, their lawyers fanned out with thick folders and quiet, clipped whispers. Elliot leaned toward me, his tone steady, reminding me to breathe evenly. Maeve, Finn, and Zara filled the row behind us, their presence like an anchor. When the judge called the session to order, Elliot began with the cleanest evidence: official reports of Peak Pulse's environmental violations, followed by drone footage of the dam's sabotage. Maeve took the stand, describing the night of the flood in precise, unshaken detail. Finn followed, his account matching hers without hesitation. The opposing counsel tried to undermine the narrative, suggesting the damage could have been due to poor maintenance. That was when Elliot asked the court to admit one final exhibit. I stepped forward with the USB. The bailiff handed me the court's laptop, and I placed the coin into the slot. A chime rang out in the quiet courtroom, followed by the playback of the meeting. Theo's voice was cold, deliberate. Lucas's was sharper, tinged with something that sounded like desperation, as he agreed to create instability in Evergreen, knowing it would weaken my custody case. The reaction in the gallery was instant: murmurs, heads turning, a camera flash from the back. The judge called for order, but the air had shifted. Then Elliot produced Gideon's supplementary will, reading aloud the clause that gave me sole power to nullify any sale of Evergreen land without community consent. A handwriting analyst testified to the forgery of my signature on the Peak Pulse contract, sealing that piece of their defense shut. The prosecutor for the state rose unexpectedly, announcing that a criminal investigation into Peak Pulse and Theo was already underway for sabotage, public endangerment, and bribery. Lucas was named as a person of interest for aiding the scheme. Under the judge's steady gaze, Lucas's confidence cracked. When questioned directly, he admitted that I was the better choice for the children's primary residence. The decision came minutes later: full custody granted to me with visitation structured on new terms. By the time the bailiffs escorted Theo out in handcuffs, Peak Pulse's legal team was in disarray. Outside protesters had already gathered, holding signs calling for the company's shutdown. For Evergreen, the outcome was immediate. National environmental organizations pledged funding and support, and the sanctuary was formally recognized as a model of sustainable community living. As I stepped into the midday light, cameras caught the moment a reporter called out, "What's next for Evergreen after this win?" I didn't slow my stride. "We're just getting started," I said. The coin was warm in my pocket now, its edge smooth from years of handling. It no longer felt like a relic from the past, but the first piece of something still unfolding. 2 weeks after the verdict, Evergreen Trust's boardroom felt warmer than I remembered. Sunlight filtered through tall glass panels onto the polished cedar table, the mist outside still clinging to the pine-covered slopes. Elliot sat at the head, Maeve and Finn flanking him, Zara with her ever-present notebook, and a team of environmental lawyers from Denver on speakerphone. This was the meeting where we would decide how to close the chapter with Peak Pulse once and for all. Elliot's voice was calm, but carried an edge of satisfaction as he announced that the full dossier of Peak Pulse's environmental violations had been formally submitted to both the EPA and the Department of Justice. Temporary injunctions had been granted. Peak Pulse was barred from setting foot anywhere near Evergreen or its surrounding watersheds. The first real wall was in place. Zara's phone buzzed mid-meeting. She read the message, her brows knitting. A media contact warned her that Peak Pulse's lobbying arm was pushing to have the damn sabotage video scrubbed from the internet under the guise of national security. The implication was clear: they wanted to rewrite the narrative before it could cement. I decided we'd end that game now. I authorized the immediate release of every recording, every report, every photo to international outlets. Once it was out globally, they wouldn't be able to bury it. On the personal front, I called Lucas to Evergreen. We met in the glass-walled atrium that overlooked the valley, sage and ivy playing nearby. He didn't meet my eyes at first. When he finally did, his words were simple. Theo had manipulated him, and he regretted the role he'd played. He turned to our children and apologized. I agreed to a cooperative parenting arrangement, but only after he signed a binding agreement never to involve himself with Evergreen's affairs or maintain any contact with Peak Pulse or its representatives. Later that day, while clearing out Gideon's old office, I discovered a sealed envelope in the back of a desk drawer. The wax bore his initials. Inside the note was brief, but heavy with intent. When you have won, remember, Evergreen isn't just for us. Expand it. Give it to more people. That is the real inheritance. That evening, I drove to the offices of Stone and Keaton. Without fanfare, I returned the commercial inheritance papers my cousins had clung to, leaving them with a single message: use them well, them. I won't be returning to your table. The weight that had lingered from those blood ties eased as I walked out the door, closing behind me like the final seal on a chapter I no longer needed to revisit. Elliot joined me on the balcony later that night, revealing that Gideon had been under pressure from the city council itself to sell the land to Peak Pulse, a revelation that made sense of his secrecy and his decision to trust only me with the coin and the will. In my study, I unrolled a state map and marked the locations of abandoned parcels of land, places that could one day be reborn as sustainable communities. Looking at those red dots, I felt the first pull of a new journey. Late autumn light slanted across Evergreen's community lawn, scattering gold across the grass. Paper lanterns swayed in the breeze, long tables brimmed with baskets of garden vegetables, and a local folk band strummed warm acoustic chords. The entire town had gathered not to fight a battle, but to celebrate survival. On the small wooden stage, Sage stood on my left, Ivy on my right. Behind us, the new Evergreen Trust banner hung, its emblem drawn from Gideon's original seal. I took the microphone and announced the formation of the Evergreen Trust, funded by Treasury bonds and the cryptocurrency account Gideon had quietly built. The mission was clear: replicate our sustainable community model across Colorado and beyond. Halfway through the ceremony, a journalist raised a question from the crowd. If your grandfather were here today, what would he say? I smiled, the answer rising without thought. He would ask if I'd found the meaning of the coin yet. And today I'd tell him the meaning is in what we build, not what we're given. The crowd's applause washed over me like sunlight breaking through a long winter. In the audience, Lucas stood quietly. When our eyes met, he nodded a silent acknowledgement of the new ground we'd built for the children. Maeve, Finn, and Zara found me afterward, glasses raised in a toast. For the first time, their pride in me felt as solid as the soil beneath us. Inside the community hall, a glass frame had been mounted on the main wall. Within it sat the $1 coin flanked by a photograph of Gideon. Beneath was a brass plate engraved "From disdain to trust." Evergreen was built with hands and hearts. I placed my palm against the glass, the cool surface steady the fractures of the past now smoothed into something whole. As twilight deepened, children raced across the lantern-lit grass, their laughter mixing with the hum of conversation and the steady murmur of the creek. I glanced at the map in my office earlier that week, the red dots marking new frontiers. They weren't just potential projects, they were promises. From the porch of the manager's house, I looked out over Evergreen, glowing in the valley below, alive with light and music. Peace was here now, but it was an active, breathing peace, one that asked to be carried forward. The coin had led me here, but the future would be built by every hand willing to shape it.